For most of 1942, the officers routing Allied convoys across the North Atlantic could not locate a single German submarine. The men commanding those submarines could read where the convoys were going. That imbalance held for the better part of a year. And the strange part of it is that the side losing ships was slower to grasp the problem than the side sinking them. The intelligence the Allies prized was the kind that came from broken codes. And most of the story that survives about it is a story of triumph. Bletchley Park, the cracked Enigma, the war bent in a hut northwest of London. The other half of that story almost never gets told. While British codebreakers fought to read enemy naval traffic, the Kriegsmarine's codebreakers were reading Allied traffic with far less effort. One of the things they read was the routing for the merchant convoys themselves, and they had been reading it for a long time before anyone on the Allied side could prove it. The outfit that did it was the B-Dienst, the German Navy's interception and code-breaking arm. Its sharpest cryptanalyst was a career radio man named Wilhelm Tranow, a man who had been picking apart Royal Navy systems since before the shooting started. Pieces of British naval traffic had been coming open to his people since the mid-1930s. By the time the war gave them a reason to hurry, the B-Dienst was not learning the trade, but practicing one it already knew. Around December 1941, Tranow's section broke into the system that counted, combined Naval Cipher Number 3, the book the British, American, and Canadian fleets shared to control convoy movements in the North Atlantic. His people could pull readable fragments out of it within hours of interception. Not the whole book. Enough. Then the Allies handed the enemy a second advantage by accident. On the 1st of February 1942, the U-boat arms switched to a fresh Enigma network, the Germans named Triton and the British called Shark. It ran on a 4-rotor machine where the old one used 3, and Bletchley went dark on submarine positions overnight. The trackers in London, who had spent months following wolfpacks by reading their own orders, held nothing in their hands. They stayed in that condition for 10 months. Across those same 10 months, the B-Dienst kept reading the convoy book without interruption. Karl Dönitz knew which stretches of ocean to seed with boats. The men guarding the merchant ships did not know where his boats were sitting. This was the heart of his strategy. Dönitz did not need to win battles, he needed to sink ships faster than the Allied yards could build them, a numbers game he called Tonnage Krieg, the War of Tonnage. Through 1942, he was winning it. The merchantmen were going down faster than they could be replaced, and a leak that put wolfpacks on the right convoys was worth more to him than any single weapon. The arithmetic of the chase made that leak deadly. A slow convoy made 7 knots through the water. A fast one made 10. A surfaced boat made 17. A submarine handed a route in advance did not have to comb the sea for smoke on the horizon. It had to be told where to wait. The Atlantic is an enormous place to hide a column of ships. The packs kept finding the column anyway. Allied staffs noticed the finding. They had a defense for it, a practice called evasive routing, which meant steering a convoy around the patches of sea where submarines were thought to be lurking. The trouble was that the patches kept turning out to be right where the ships had been steered. A formation would be diverted north to dodge a reported patrol line, and a patrol line would already be gathering to the north. By 1943, the enemy was reaching even further into Allied communications. That year, the Germans put trained operators aboard some boats to listen in on the voice chatter between convoy escorts. It happened too often to be weather, and too often to be luck. Someone, somewhere, was getting the routing. Suspecting a leak and proving one are different jobs, and the second is far harder. A convoy could be located a dozen plausible ways. A chance sighting from a surfaced boat, a long-range aircraft, ordinary direction finding off the convoy's own radio chatter. Any single interception could be explained without admitting that the enemy was reading the mail. The pattern was the thing, and patterns are easy to argue about. Through most of 1942, the men who might have raised the alarm had nothing an admiral would accept, and the Navy that owned the cipher had a strong institutional reason to prefer the comfortable answers. The American who dragged the question into the light was not a sailor in any usual sense. By the spring of 1943, Kenneth Knowles was 38 years old, bespectacled and quiet enough that his Naval Academy classmates had marked him a man who was slow to make friends. The Navy had medically discharged him in 1938 over trouble with his eyes and his ears. He spent the years after that editing a trade journal called Our Navy from an office near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is not the sort of place a flag career gets built. The war pulled him back, first to teach reserve officers at the University of Texas, well inland, and then to London, because a patron named Francis Lowe remembered that Knowles could boil a mountain of paper down to one clear page. In London, he was sent to understudy a man worth understudying. Roger Wynne ran the Royal Navy's submarine tracking room. A barrister by trade whom childhood polio had left with a bent spine and a limp, turned down for sea duty and channeled instead into the one room where his mind paid off. Wynne's domain was a cramped basement, his staff called Lenin's Tomb, built around a single huge table carrying a chart of the ocean stuck with colored pins. Red marked a confirmed fix on a boat. White marked a sighting that might or might not be real. Blue marked a position worked out by triangulating radio bearings. Wynne moved the pins and read the sea off them, and his guesses about where the wolfpacks were and where they were heading were good enough that his superiors stopped second-guessing his rerouting. He called those guesses useful fictions, and he was seldom wrong about them. Knowles watched how it was done and carried the method home. He returned to the United States in December 1942 and stood up his own room in the main Navy building on the National Mall in Washington under the plain designation F-21. The work matched Wynne's. Take the decrypted German signals, the direction-finding bearings, the sighting reports, and from that wreckage build a running picture of where every submarine in the Atlantic probably sat. Knowles turned out to be unsettling at it. One escort group commander who leaned on his forecasts before sailing called him a soothsayer, uncanny in his predictions, and admitted his task group planned its operations on F-21's estimates and almost nothing else. That reputation would matter later, when Knowles needed people above him to believe a conclusion they did not want to hear. There was one source the trackers had that the field commanders did not, and it changed how the puzzle looked from inside the room. F-21 read the enemy's own traffic. When Bletchley broke back into Shark in the middle of December 1942, the rooms in London and Washington began seeing the orders Dönitz sent his boats, sometimes within a day or two of his sending them. They could watch a wolfpack being told to move to a grid reference, and they could set that reference against where the convoys had been routed. Most people will never look this up on their own. That is what this channel is for. Subscribe if you want to keep going. What Knowles and his analysts found in that comparison was hard to wave off. The German Navy did not chart the sea in latitude and longitude. It overlaid the Atlantic with a grid of lettered and numbered squares, and the boats moved by grid reference, the letters disguised further by substitution codes the enemy changed often. Reading an order meant first untangling which patch of water a group like CD-87 stood for. The trackers had reconstructed much of the grid by patient cross-checking, so when a signal went out sending 16 boats to one box, F-21 could drop that box onto the same chart that held the convoy lanes. More and more, the two kept landing in the same water. A pack was being aimed not at the ocean in general, but at a specific column of merchantmen days before that column arrived. The reckoning came in the middle of May 1943, in the worst stretch of the whole campaign. That spring was the climax of the Atlantic War. In March, the submarines had sunk about 120 merchant ships, close to 700,000 tons, and the running battle around two formations called HX-229 and SC-122 became the largest convoy engagement of the war. 60-odd ships against nearly 40 boats. German radio crowed about the greatest convoy battle of all time. A Royal Navy report afterward judged that the enemy had never come so near to cutting the link between the New World and the Old as in the first 3 weeks of that month. Then the balance swung hard against Dönitz, and in the swing he handed the Allies their proof. Two more eastbound convoys had sailed from New York at the start of May, HX-237 and SC-129, both bound for Liverpool with war cargo. Waiting in their path were 3 Wolfpack patrol lines the Germans had named Rhine, Elbe, and Drossel. During the fighting around those formations, the U-boat command sent its boats a handful of signals in its most guarded channel, the officer-only cipher reserved for the most sensitive material. The code breakers read 3 of them. Laid against the Allied routing dispatches, those 3 messages were not ambiguous. The orders reflected the contents of Allied signals almost line for line. The enemy was not guessing the routes, he was reading them. Convinced now that the cipher itself was the leak, Knowles' section did the unglamorous thing that turns a suspicion into a case. It got access to the 10th Fleet convoy and routing files, the record of every dispatch the Allies had sent ordering those ships around. The analysts laid the German messages beside the Allied originals and identified which of the originals had been compromised. Then the evidence went up the chain to COMINCH, the office of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, Admiral Ernest King. The conclusions were accepted. That single line in a file reads like routine paperwork, and it closed a question that had killed thousands of men. For more than a year, the leak had been a thing people suspected and could not nail down. Now it was a thing the Navy's highest commander could not pretend away. Knowles had a temperamental edge in pushing it that far, and he knew it. The British, who owned the cipher and had built the Alliance's whole code system, were cautious to a fault about anything touching their secret intelligence. They were terrified of any move that might tip the Germans off that Enigma had been broken, and that fear made them slow. Knowles thought his own side wrung more out of the same material by being willing to act on it, and he said as much in later years. The split in temperament ran all the way up. That April, King and the British First Sea Lord Dudley Pound had traded sharp cables about how aggressively to use code intelligence at all. Pound warned against risking something so valuable. King shot back that they were not getting the full value out of it. The argument was never settled, but on the cipher leak, the cautious side had run out of room to stall. The fix, once the proof was undeniable, came fast by the standards of the thing. Combined Naval Cipher Number 3 was retired, and a new book, Naval Cipher Number 5, went into force on the 10th of June 1943. The window the B-Dienst had been reading through for a year and a half slammed shut. The route stopped leaking, and the timing folded into a broader collapse of the German campaign that month. They called it Black May. The month more than 36 boats went to the bottom, and Dönitz pulled his packs off the North Atlantic lanes. How much the code change alone carried inside that turn is impossible to isolate, and the analysts who studied it afterwards said so. The Navy's own post-war account admitted there was no way to measure how much of the enemy's convoy knowledge had come from the broken book and how much from ordinary traffic analysis. The two were braided together, and nobody could pull them cleanly apart. What is not braided together and what sits least easily in the record is the timing of the warning. The Americans proved the compromise in May 1943, and the book changed weeks later. The British had known, in a fashion, far earlier. Through their own reading of a separate German teleprinter cipher, British intelligence had learned in August 1942 that the B-Dienst was solving the convoy ciphers. The Admiralty was told. The book did not change for 10 months, and this was not a Navy that lacked the reflex to react. When the same B-Dienst had broken Royal Navy Cipher Number 2 back in 1941, British codebreakers caught the break and swapped in a new book inside a few months. The capability was there. On Cipher Number 3, it simply was not used, and the record offers no clean account of why. The men routing the ships through that winter were steering them around an enemy who held a copy of the map, and the copy stayed in his hands a great deal longer than it ever had to. Kenneth Knowles finished the war a reserve captain and passed afterward into an organization the public was not told existed until 1975, the National Security Agency. He died in 1986. The figure historians have settled on for the tracking rooms he and Wynne ran is that their work fed into the destruction of more than 90 Axis submarines, over half of those by American hunter-killer groups. He never commanded a ship. The Navy had decided in 1938 that his eyes and ears made him unfit to serve, and the most consequential thing he did in the war was notice, from a basement on the National Mall, that the enemy already knew the answers.